Hey guys, so glad to have everybody here. My name is Chris Curtis, and we've got a few folks joining us today that are kind of fun. We've got my buddy here, David Youngman. Hey, everybody introduce yourself. Who else is on there? Come on.
I'll jump in. Bobby Harris. I'm in Oklahoma, police officer here, and a big Indiana Jones fan.
Hey, I'm Adam Karolian. I'm in the Northeast up in New Hampshire, and I've been a lifelong Indy fan. Can still remember the first time I saw Raiders.
How about Aaron there? What have you got going on with Aaron Zolden?
I'm Aaron Zolden. I'm in Orlando, Florida. I've been part of the Indiana Jones Epic Stunt Spectacular for 15 years playing Indy.
Awesome.
And then Myrna, tell us about you.
Yeah, I was so interested in you guys. I was like, let's chat more about all of this. I'm Myrna Velasco. I'm based out of Los Angeles, California, and I am the voice of Torredoza on Star Wars Resistance and a lifelong Indiana Jones fan. So I was really excited to join the panel.
Fantastic. Thank you. So yes, as you maybe have picked up by now, we're all here to talk a little bit about Indiana Jones and kind of our love of that fandom. And so we want everybody to remember, please, the reason we're doing a lot of this is to donate to First Robotics. So please, man, you guys take some time and show a little love. We're trying to do some good in the world, okay? And without further ado, we're going to start talking a little bit about Indiana Jones. Man, you know, this character was created kind of like what Adam mentioned. I'm also a lifelong fan. I think most of us here probably are. You know, I saw it as a young boy, and obviously Star Wars had a big impact on my life and wanted me to be, you know, an astronaut and such. But after I saw Indiana Jones, there was a keen plan B where it's like, if I can't make the astronaut thing happen, maybe I can be an archaeologist because that looks too cool, right? So anybody else have kind of a fun thing with relative to that in your upbringing?
Well, I will say real quick, the first time I hadn't seen Indiana Jones yet when it first came out. I was in kindergarten. I was 5 years old, and I had my best friend on the playground had already seen it, and I'd just seen the trailer. So when we were going to play Indiana Jones, because he'd seen the movie, he got to be Indiana Jones, but he told me that I could be Indiana Jones's sidekick, Harrison Ford. So I got to be Harrison Ford, the sidekick to Indiana Jones, when we played at the kindergarten playground.
If you got to be a sidekick, I guess that's not a bad stick, right?
That's right. And I'm still pretending to be Harrison Ford all the time.
Aren't we all?
Yeah, aren't we all?
What you got here?
Similarly, if I may, I grew up with the VHS version of Indiana Jones because I was not alive when Raiders of the Lost Ark came out. So not that I'm super young, but anyway.
Yeah.
There's a lot of lighting going on. No, jokes aside, I, very serious business, grew up, me and my little brother played Indiana Jones in this ranch house we had growing up in. And we got this last room where it was just kind of anything goes in there. It may have been a gym at one point, but we just put stuff in that room. So it was this like perfect space to play Indiana Jones. And I too could not be Indiana Jones because my brother is a boy and I'm a girl. So I didn't even get to be Harrison Ford. So how lucky.
But Marion's a great character too. I mean, come on, right? Yeah. We love Marion.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Marion is like she's like the first tough girl role model for me, I would say. So it was never. We had really hard arguments about like, could Marion do that? And I was always like, yes, she could, because she also has to wear the high heels while running down that street. Okay. So yeah, she can do anything. We're jumping across the Grand Canyon right now in our imagination. Let's do it.
Awesome. Adam, what about you? What you got going on?
I mean, as far as Indy goes, I mean, I remember my dad was home. It must have been like a Sunday or something. I was very young. I was maybe like 3, maybe 4. But he saw that it was going to come on cable, and he was like, "You have to sit down. We have to watch this movie. It's great." And I think I got till maybe the Ravenwood bar scene before I was already out in the yard playing Indiana Jones, because I mean the costume really hooked me and has kind of dictated everything that I've done in my life up to this point. But yeah.
Amazing.
And Aaron, man, we've got to talk about a superstar on our hands here too, right?
Well, I don't know about that. I'm one of many people who have done it. I was honored to get to do it for as long as I did. I actually grew up mostly. My mom was a huge Star Wars fan, so by extension, that's just kind of where my life started with Lucasfilm. And then I always liked the character Indiana Jones. I liked that he was a very different kind of what I would have called a superhero when I was younger. But it really wasn't until I got hired at Disney and started doing the role that I grew much more appreciative of the nuances of the character. And I became such a much bigger fan when I was forced to, put on that brown and tan all the time.
Oh, I bet.
So
yeah, you were talking a little bit about that earlier. I found that pretty fascinating. Tell us a little bit about, like you just mentioned, the nuance of that character and what you guys have to work on. Not necessarily the stunt aspect, but the other cool things.
Yeah, so over my course or the time there, I ended up being a trainer. So I would train in all the new performers that would come into the role, and the stunts are really the easy part, because most of the people who get hired, like that's something that they're already pretty confident in. So the hard part for everyone is to nail down the nuances of the character that Harrison Ford embodied as Indiana Jones. He's not. We were kind of talking earlier. He's not a superhero. He's not. He can get hurt. He gets punched. He's not the best. He's just super lucky a lot of times, and a lot of his decisions, they don't start out to be. He doesn't set out to be funny. It kind of ends up being that way.
Sure.
And when we train people in these roles, we really spend a lot of time on the acting nuances of trying to Harrison Ford everything from, when you're looking around the temple with your torch to try and hold it the same way he did and try and move the way he did. And, we were talking earlier about his run. His run is really, nobody runs like Harrison Ford does. So, when that ball did launch, you're not just trying to get away from it. You're not trying to be on time with the music. You're not just trying to not get crushed by this 400-pound boulder. You're trying to do it all as Harrison Ford. And those are the little things that when I got to play the character, I loved. I loved the challenges of doing that and finding new ways to do that.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Something you said there kind of made me think how interesting it is that Indiana Jones, a lot of the things he accomplishes or he achieves are due to luck. And in some regard, I think Harrison Ford falls into that same category, really, I mean, as an actor, right? Because he clearly kind of lucked into the Star Wars thing, right? He was, a woodworker. He was working on installing a door in George's office whenever they were like, hey, I need you to step in and do this thing with this cast because we're missing somebody. And then all of a sudden becomes Han Solo, which we can agree is not too far off from Harrison Ford in some way, from Indiana Jones in many ways, right? I mean, they're similar characters, the swagger and sarcasm and wit.
And that's kind of like what's so cool and difficult about the job, I would imagine, because it's like you're being Harrison Ford as this character because ultimately we're looking for the Harrison Ford isms when watching any show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about you, man?
I mean, he has this overconfident bravado that he can kind of portray that not too many other actors, I think, can. And he's vulnerable at the same time.
Right.
That always drew me into.
It doesn't hurt here.
Yeah.
Don't do it, man. Don't do it.
But that's kind of what drew me into the character. And then, like, the story itself, I always the kind of immersive history he has with every character he interacts with in the movies. It's like they have this rich history. He and Short Round and
Sola,
yeah,
and obviously Marion, right?
yes. It's like you're dropped in the middle of his life, and it's full of this history, and they just give you just enough for you to kind of move on with the story, but leave you wanting more.
Like, okay, a little bit of like gossip here.
All right, yeah.
What do you guys think happened between Indy and Marion? And like, how did he acquire Short Round as a companion? Like, these are really interesting character ideas of like, who is this person that just like adopts a kid and is like, also go on adventures with me, let's go. Like
we're Short Round's mom and dad, right?
Right.
right. And then like, but I don't know if you guys remember, but huge memory of mine. Marion like is really upset with Indy when they first meet, and like she just goes on about like, how could you? I was a kid, and it's like, what happened there? Like what?
Love it. Like David and I were having this conversation literally a little bit earlier when we were talking about things to discuss here. And there was she makes a comment about, I was just a child. And we were like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
She's not like a child. She's like in college, right? And he's maybe.
Well, no, maybe she was like a high school girl and he broke her heart and he knew better because he was an adult, you know? Like,
yeah.
I love the time period. I think the writing is just so. I think one of you guys said it, like it's timeless, and it really kind of like encapsulates this time period in America where like I don't know. I don't identify as like a fully American person. I'm a Mexican American, so I often find like these weird differences. But like the quintessential American man is Indiana Jones, like post World War II. Like he's smart, but he's smart and tactical, and as well as like sensitive to the needs of others when he needs to be. Like it's
right.
Yummy character.
Yeah, able to climb into lead-lined refrigerators and survive nuclear blasts. I mean, that's only an American thing, right?
Yeah. And break hearts while he's at it.
Yes, of course. Oh my gosh. Well, there are all kinds of interesting trivia that while I was over the years, I've gleaned some of it here and there, but I've always been fascinated with like the behind the scenes stuff, which is some of the reason that like Aaron's stuff always interests me when he's talking about having to portray Harrison portraying Indy, because I'm for whatever reason consumed with inert trivia. I don't know why. I think a lot of us are that are in this kind of fandom, I guess. But there were things like Harrison getting injured while they were shooting Raiders, the flying wing scene, and apparently it like rolled over his knee. I remember that for like decades ago. I learned that, and I don't know where or why. But apparently that was a thing. So he was out of commission for a little bit doing that. And I guess he got hurt shooting Temple of Doom as well. He hurt his back. And was out for like 6 weeks while they were shooting. And apparently, yeah, his stunt guy, which is Vic, isn't that right? Vic Armstrong?
Armstrong, yeah.
Sounds right, yeah.
Did most of the scene in the down in the catacombs when they were on the conveyor belt and that big action sequence. That was almost all Vic because Harrison was out of commission.
What does that say about the actor stuntman relationship, Aaron?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that depends on the actor a lot of times. But yeah, someone like Tom Cruise doesn't want a stunt double for anything.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's better to have one, obviously, because if your principal actor, i.e. Harrison Ford, hurts his knee or hurts his back, production stops.
Right.
Usually you can get another stunt double in there in a day or two. So, stunt doubles are generally we're the guys who get beat up so that the principal doesn't get beat up.
So you're the unsung heroes.
That's right.
Hey, I used to watch The Fall Guy. See, I'm like the oldest of all of you guys because everybody's like, oh, I saw it on VHS. And I guess I'm the fossil. So Indy would come looking for me, right? Although I'm not that valuable.
Yes,
right?
you
Belong in the museum.
Yes, yes, there's that. But yeah, Bobby, what do you got? You've got some stuff about costuming because obviously, I mean, I know that like obviously we're a lot of us are 501st members or Rebel Legion members and Man and Works members and such. So we're big into the costuming world. So I've got I got a cool hat and some collectible stuff here and there, and David's got some kind of stuff too. But man, I have as of yet I've not jumped hardcore into a lot of the indie costuming, and I'm chomping at the bone to do so. But man, you've got a ton of resources between you and Adam that I'm sure you could share to let us know, hey, how do we do some of that?
Yeah, for me, the Indiana Jones costume was probably the first step into trying to authentically replicate any kind of costume from a movie. It was Halloween. It was around the time of Crystal Skull coming out. It got me re-excited about the character I loved as a kid. So I just wanted to put together a Halloween costume. And back then, my wife and I used to do it sort of a challenge where we'd make our own Halloween costumes with as little money as possible. So the first Indiana Jones costume I put together was 100% thrift store finds. I think there was only one exception where I went to like a kind of a costume shop, and that was to find a holster that would look correct. But the jacket that I had was a close enough jacket that I weathered to make look better, and a shirt was close enough. Shoes, again, thrift store that looked close enough, and it came together pretty nice for thrift store finds and whatnot. But then it's one of those things where the rabbit hole of obsession just goes on and on, where you start researching this and looking at different people's very, very super accurate costumes, and that kind of kept going on to replacing pieces here and there and getting more and more accurate costume pieces. And that actually kind of led into some other ones, Halloween still, until a Star Wars costume for a Halloween came up, and I wanted to try to do it accurate. And that's kind of what brought me into Rebel Legion at first, and then 501st after that. So really, all of the kind of accuracy level costuming started with the Indiana Jones.
Wow.
Year.
And Adam, I see a plethora of Indiana Jones components behind you there. That's awesome.
Yeah, I think I've got 4 hats out here, including this one, and I've got another one that I'm working on outside. But yeah, I think one thing that I love about indie and like the costuming is that it's so approachable. Like Bobby, like you can thrift so much and it sells the character. And you also just feel so cool when you're in it. So like even if you have just like LL Bean khakis and a shirt, as long as you have the hat, you're gonna feel like indie.
And a bullwhip. And a bullwhip, right?
And a bullwhip. Results may vary with what you can get with that, but yeah. I mean, really similar story. It started, finding like close enough pieces here and there, and then kind of the first, I would say like quote real costume I put together was Han Solo, and then kind of burned through that, and then started indie. I was at a convention maybe like 2 years ago. It definitely wasn't last year, but a couple of years ago, and it was like Sunday, and I had gone through most of my costumes, and I was in indie, and I walked by one of the artists' table, and he was like, "Man, do you cosplay anything other than Harrison Ford?" I was like, "All right, I get the point."
And nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Right. I went down a rabbit hole. I mean, at one point, and this is like I said, I've always thought I wanted to do an indie costume, but I just haven't done that yet. I'll add that to the list of like 8,000 costumes that I want to do and have started and not completed. Right. But I went down the rabbit hole at one point of bullwhips, and I started researching, like screen caliber, the stuff that they use on screen and so on. And then you fall into, oh, okay, hey, maybe I can just make my own, and kangaroo hide. And I mean, all that. I'm like, what? Wait, press pause, back to reality. So I haven't gotten there yet, but someday.
I will say I did make this hat.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that India's got me into is hat making for some reason, just acquiring as many unemployable skills as I can gather.
Dude, that is a costuming thing. I remember making, I made my first Jedi belt, right? And it was my first foray into any kind of leather work at all. And it was not hard. It was nothing complicated about it. I just did it. And I was like, okay, this isn't hard. Okay, fine. And so now every iteration, I try to step up the game and learn something new. And I did an Imperial officer, something not long ago, or was it a few years ago. And I was looking and I was like, I'm going to make that. I know how to make the belt. I'll just make the belt. And I got to looking and it ended up, the pricing for the materials cost more than I could just buy a completed belt. And it bothered me so much. I was like, wait, no, I need to make it myself. But then I had to go through this checklist. Am I going to learn anything, any new skill? No. And is it going to save me any money? No. So I'm just going to buy one. There's no sense in me, but anytime I can, whether it's learning something about sewing or armor making or hat making or whatever, if it's something that I can learn through costuming, then I'm keen on doing that.
That's
It's just another challenge. Hence, whip making. That's going to be the next thing, right? What you got, Myrna?
Oh, I was just like, I'm just admiring you guys so much because let's be real here. First of all, unless you're making it yourself, I kind of feel like Indiana Jones is so iconic that like you don't ever, as long as you get the hat or you buy a hat, then people are like, oh, Indiana Jones. But I'm so enamored with you guys that are like, I'm going to learn a new skill to then get the exact type of hat that Indiana Jones has. Like, to me, I am so of the camp of like, can I just buy it? Can I just go
It's a sickness. I'll just tell you, it's a sickness. And I think anybody else here would probably agree with that. It's
No, but it's such a good sickness.
right.
You learned how to make a hat, dude. Like,
I'm not looking for a cure.
excellent. Okay, but okay, so real question though, for both Bobby and Adam, if I may, Chris.
Yes.
I'm so into this idea of like collecting so many different iterations of Indiana Jones replica or costume. First, explain the difference between that to me. And second, like what was the item that you bought or made that you realized like this is my life now. This is what I do.
Well, Adam's kind of actually made some career moves with his work. I know he does really fantastic costuming pieces for Star Wars and some indie pieces now too. That when I do Han Solo, his pants are the ones that I wear to do the Han Solo costume that I have.
Yeah, thank you, Bobby. Yeah, I mean, I love being able to provide that stuff for the community, and it's always super humbling to like I am a member of the Rebel Legion. Unfortunately, I don't get to go out too much. When I joined, I was working nights and weekends, so that pretty much took up all the events. But just like seeing people enjoying work that you do is really, really cool. I would say as far as like iterations, I mean, we were talking before, but all the headpieces to the Staff of Ra that we have behind Bobby is like a great example, I think, of collecting, all the iterations that you can.
Yeah, there's like a single-sided and then a two-sided, of course, just like in the film. But aren't there others that are?
Yeah, there's like I guess technically three different kind of ones. There's the one that when Tote grabs it when it's hot and it melts into his hand, it creates an impression that they then make a mold out of from his burned skin. But that's like the Nazi version. So
Wow.
one side has just got like a Nazi emblem on it, and then it's flat, like they poured it into a mold. And then the sort of the hero one, there was sort of two versions. There was one that they shot in the Raven bar, which had a certain style to the carving on the medallion. And then there's later scenes where they're discussing it again, and they have one that you can, if you look at the movie, you clearly see that the sculpting on it is quite a bit different. There's not like certain relief to the wings. It's more straight lines and things like that. So there's, just like in Star Wars, where Han Solo uses his blaster in one scene and it's one type of blaster, and uses it elsewhere and it's a totally different looking blaster, but from far away it looks kind of the same.
Yeah.
I don't think
I've
people
heard
expect
the Idol is a similar thing, right? The Idol has multiple versions of it, and I've heard that it can be a challenge to get one that is the most accurate, right?
Well, I know for that like fertility deal, they
Yes.
shot some scenes where when you look at it, there's like real eyeballs that move around inside of it, sort of a mystical element. But then they ended up not using it or whatever, but you can still see in photographs and props that one with the eyes and the servos that are in the back of it to make the eyes move for that scene that they originally intended it.
Wow.
And then there's some that look more like just flat spray painted, kind of like the one that I have. And then there's some that look, shiny or reflective.
All the goodies. These are the rabbit holes we go into. I mean,
Yeah,
that
exactly.
minutia about, wait a minute, I don't have the one from scene 27, line 13, where this thing I don't know why that's so driving. I don't know why it's so all consuming.
Yeah,
But I'm
we're
in.
talking about hats, like Adam's making hats. There's another one of the guys that made this hat that's up here. His name is Brian. He goes by Screen Capped. Used to be leather and hats, but now it's just Screen Capped hats. He goes through this specific. If he makes a hat for you, it's based off of a specific set of scenes, because there's different hats that are used in filming. Plus, the hat takes on different abuse during the course of filming. And so it takes on look, whether it's because of water damage to the hat or Harrison wearing it all the time, so it sweats and changes the taper of the crown.
Yeah.
And so when he makes a hat, he asks, exactly kind of what set of scenes in a particular movie that you're looking to try to replicate. So
Wow.
it does get like very specific, like where the ribbon is kind of placed on the hat, or where the turn and the brim is. It gets very, very detailed.
So I've always wondered this, and I mean, I'm making an assumption, but I'm curious. So the hat that he wears at the university, for example, with his, tweed suit, would that be this? Is it the same hat that he wears while he's out on his adventures, or do you think he swaps it out? Like he's got a dress hat, and then he's got an adventure hat.
In Raiders, they definitely use different color hats. So he's got a sable colored, gray, I guess, colored hat that I think, if I'm not wrong, that's what he wears on the airplane. And then there's the scene at the end when he comes down the steps. I think he's got a different hat on. So he definitely, of that time period, people just wore hats. It was a common thing for people to wear fedora style hats. And so just like any man of that time period, he's got hats that go with the suits.
Now, I would say, while I don't do a lot of indie costume necessarily, I do wear hats a lot, and most of what I wear are fedoras. Like I've got a couple of crushables, and one over here that I wear in rain or whatever. This is just a replica, like an indie licensed piece. But I have fedoras that I wear like on an everyday, regular basis. Not as much in the summer as much as in the winter. And then I've got like a brown leather jacket, and I think that these were more subconscious decisions. I wasn't trying to go out and buy an indie costume, It's walking through a store. It's like, man, I really like that jacket. I don't know why, but I love that jacket. So I buy this brown leather jacket, and then I end up with a fedora that I wear around all the time. And the number of times I'd be walking through a store and it's like, oh, you're doing Indiana Jones. And I'm like, no, but yeah.
Yeah, I can't
pull this part of the appeal.
What's the whip for? I don't know. It was the ensemble that came, like, I don't know.
Yeah, I can't pull off a fedora in daily life. It's baseball cap if it's a hat, because I think the fedora is too much, and just the world has moved on from the fedora.
What are you saying, Bobby?
Hey, like, it comes back because we bring it back, man.
That's right. I'm retaking the fedora.
Well, it's so iconic at this point that you couldn't wear it without somebody thinking Indiana Jones.
Yeah, I guess that's maybe true. It gets a lot of comments, and I seriously don't wear it. Matter of fact, my dad got me the one that I wear most often for like Christmas one year. And it's kind of a two-tone. It's like a brown and a black, type combo, or different shades of brown. And I like it a lot. It's crushable, like the one Bobby was talking about. So it's easy to wear, and it weathers well. And it's comfortable.
That's what's important.
Yes. Well, I've got this nifty my little electronic ear thing going on back here, and it really shouldn't be getting wet. So I a lot of times wear a wide brim hat to keep that from going on. And that does help. So hey, there's a practical, this is me making an excuse for trying to look like Indiana Jones. Right.
Yeah.
Valid excuse.
Why do we need excuses anymore? Why can't we just walk out in our costumes and be like,
Yes.
yeah,
I'm
feeling
in.
today?
Oh my gosh. Let's see. One of the other things we were talking about here were like, obviously everybody knows, Raiders and Temple of Doom and Last Crusade. And I kind of went back and I'll say that I'm even guilty of what we're going to talk about here, but the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, I was at an age, and I think David and I were talking about this earlier, and I was at an age where it's kind of that transitional period. I was, like in high school and such when it was going on, or maybe early college days. And so I didn't have the time to sit and engage and watch those. And for some reason, they just kind of kept slipping my mind. I never came back, and I've seen some of them, but I've not watched them in their entirety. But how about you guys? Did you guys watch all of those and feel the same fervor for the character?
I honestly, I completely missed it. I think when it was on, I just wasn't even aware that it was airing. Like I was just too young. But yeah, I haven't been able to find them. I wish I could. Like I played a lot of the video games, I remember, but which are, they're fun with the story drive and everything. But
Yeah, I definitely I watched them when they aired because I was old enough I already liked Indiana Jones as a character, and so I was I watched it hoping to see the little fan service tidbits towards Indiana Jones the character. So I pretty much I think I watched all of them, and the the longer that the show went on, and once Sean Patrick Flannery started taking on the role of a slightly older Indy and adopted a similar-ish hat, even though he wears a fedora backwards in the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles. So
wow,
the pinch is pushed out, and then it's backwards at the same time. So it looks very unusual and different. It looks pretty sort of floppy. But I got into it. I mean, I liked when the show originally aired, it had this bumper at the beginning and the end that was supposed to be old Indiana Jones with an eye patch and a cane, and he sort of set up the story that they were going to tell. And they tried to make it an educational film, so they brought in historical characters and stuff like that for the young Indiana Jones to sort of play off of and get in sort of small adventures with. And then the older that he got, it became a little bit more adventurous, in style, rather than just meeting, famous characters and interacting with it.
Yeah, cool. I heard at one point they actually tried to market it to schools, to like history classes and such in schools, as kind of a teaching utility, as a way to create fun in the classroom and introduce historical things at the same time.
Yeah, Lucasfilm was definitely trying to push, and LucasArts and all that were definitely trying to push an educational aspect to their company. And I think that was, a big part of it, of that educational push. I don't know that it succeeded really in any of the efforts, but yeah. I mean, I think Indiana Jones fans still like it. I recorded a bunch of them on VHS and still have them, and it's a little harder to play VHS now, but I haven't thrown them out, especially since I think the releases so far haven't had maybe the bumpers or all the bumpers of the old Indiana Jones in it. Maybe considering continuity's sake for all the new films that are still.
Yeah, that's cool. I haven't tried to find them anywhere yet. The set that I held up a moment ago, those belong to David here, who was gracious enough to bring them by. And he's like, hey, we can sit out. So we may have to have an Indiana Jones marathon sometime soon and rip through those, because I haven't seen all of those.
Yeah.
How many seasons were there?
Well, there were, as I understand, there were 2 full seasons, and the first season was like 6 episodes, and the second season was like 22. And then it got canceled, and then they shot 4 like made-for-television movies that then I don't know that they got released. And then like in 1999, they re-edited the whole series into like 22 episodic things. And I think that's what this DVD set is here. Yeah. And Bobby was talking about how he thinks they cut out some of the bumpers, the older Indy telling the stories or flashbacks. I think they maybe cut some of that out of this, so that'll be sad to miss some of those things. Although there's some YouTube version of it out there I can find.
Yeah, I think there are.
Ah,
Cool.
Yeah, everything's on YouTube.
more things to learn about, more things to watch Indiana Jones wise. So exciting.
Absolutely. Now I know that there was some interesting stuff again that this is me going down the rabbit hole of the internet. That's what it's made for, right?
Yeah.
But some of these things that I knew, but some of them that I didn't know, like I think most people who are kind of Indiana Jones fans remember that Tom Selleck was actually originally cast as Indy, right? And I can tell you that I grew up on like Magnum PI. I think Selleck would have been a good Indiana Jones. I do think he would have made a good Indy. He's no Harrison Ford, but if you've ever seen him in a show called Quigley Down Under, a movie, great fun film. And I do think he's got the right swagger and persona that he could have done it justice. But one that I found interesting that I didn't know is Sulla, Indy's friend, right? Played by John Rhys Davies. You know who was originally cast as that character?
That's something I don't know.
Danny DeVito.
Wow.
Danny
Perfect.
DeVito was originally cast, and he ran into the same issue that Tom Selleck had, where Tom was kind of encapsulated with Magnum PI at the time, and the studio didn't want to release him to do this movie because they had a lot invested in the TV show. And DeVito was tied up in Taxi at the moment. And Taxi, the studio wouldn't release him to come and participate. So the role went to John Rhys Davies, who I love in the role.
Yeah, I
I
guess he
don't know
got
what I think about DeVito doing it. I mean, DeVito was in
That seems so
Well,
wildly
he
different.
got to do Romancing the Stone. Which
Romancing the Stone. Exactly. I was going to say DeVito did that, and
Yeah.
I think I could see it. I would be curious to see it.
There's a comedy element to his character in Romancing the Stone.
There is.
I don't know. That's hard to imagine.
I don't know, but it fascinated me because that was one I had never heard before.
Yeah.
And I don't know. It seemed. I mean, I read a long list of people who tried out, who auditioned for like Marion, and I mean, a lot of big names that we've all seen and grown and love and all kinds of properties over the years. And I'm drawing a blank on who most of them are right now. But
Yeah, it's interesting to think about. Even with when you see the casting stuff with Star Wars and the different people that they tried out, to try to imagine how that role that we've sort of that's become iconic because of a certain actor or actress.
yeah,
And then you try to imagine it as somebody else, and it's difficult to do.
absolutely.
With Selleck, I can see it, especially because of the original concept paintings really had that Tom Selleck look to them. The Steranko paintings that were done. I mean, it looked like Tom Selleck being the character. So I could.
Well, and I would even say anybody who's watched any of the original Magnum PI episodes, there's a similarity in their characters. It goes back to something Aaron mentioned earlier, where Selleck, his PI character, is a little clumsy. I mean, he's a smart guy, right? He's clever, but he's a little clumsy and lucky at times in the things that he does. So I think that there are some parallels in the character that we see in his Magnum PI character versus, with what Indy became.
Yeah, it's probably the things that made him a choice for Indy in the first place is the way he plays characters, and however they wrote PI was probably the same kind of vein.
Definitely.
See, would Indy have had a?
Plus, you get to see him as Chip and Dale now. Whenever they do the Chip and Dale, one looks like Indiana Jones and one looks like Magnum PI with the.
Oh
line
yeah.
shirt. The other one has the hat and the leather jacket.
Would Indy have been wearing a fedora and a leather jacket and a Hawaiian shirt?
Yeah, it could be a mustache.
Mustache.
That's exactly what I was thinking this whole time. I was just like trying to think about Indiana Jones with a mustache, though.
Right.
And I don't
How did you just had a mustache? So did you just get rid of it?
I did. I did like 2 days ago. I shaved my mustache off.
I was wondering.
Just
if you're-
for us, right? That's just for us, right, Adam?
It is. I gotta get cleaned up.
Yeah, I wanted
beard and be
to grow
clean.
the scruff out, and as a police officer, I can't have a scruffy face in the middle of my work week.
Yeah. Well, circling back to even when we were talking about these different people, I mean, obviously Indy has been played by Sean Patrick Flannery, obviously Harrison Ford, Um, Connery played his dad. There've been rumblings about, and I've always thought this was an interesting idea. Now we know that obviously Harrison Ford is Indiana Jones, right? But if they were to treat the series, treat that saga something like James Bond, right? Something like 007, where once Harrison is kind of completed done with the role, who could carry that torch? And there've been rumors that I've read and seen, and I kind of have a little bit of faith in. I mean, not in the rumors, but in could he do it? Certainly, Chris Pratt, I think, has some of the mannerisms that are similar to Indiana Jones, to Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones, right? But who else would you guys think could pick up that torch and run with it? Pun intended.
Right. Pick up the torch.
Volunteering. Yeah.
I don't know. I think it'd be, to me, I wouldn't have a problem. I know everybody's got their opinions about if he could be recast, but I think if they shot similar to the way Sean Patrick Flannery did him at a certain age, I think there's kind of a lot of stories pre-Raiders that could be, told. Just like, Temple of Doom was supposed to be pre-Raiders also in terms of the timeline.
Yeah.
So, I think it's possible. I also have seen some sort of tests of people doing an animated version, and I think an animated version would be fantastic, because you wouldn't necessarily have to. It wouldn't be such a big leap to imagine it being somebody else, even if it's voiced by,
Right. Indiana Jones lends itself to serials, right? So, think about comics and think about how great, our shows like Clone Wars and Resistance have done. Yeah, that opens up an entirely new world. Plus, production costs are lower. That would be really, really interesting. I would certainly watch that.
To me, I think if they're going to transition, if they did a good animated series like they're doing with Star Wars, and ran that for a little bit, and then if you picked up movies again later with a different actor, you've gotten some time and a new audience that have seen him in animated form, and I think it would be a smoother transition for me to see a whole nother actor in it, but not a movie with Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones, and then next year a new actor playing him. I think would be a little bit of a jarring thing.
You need to get out of here with all that logic, Bobby.
I just want a cartoon.
And Myrna can play Marion, right? You can do Marion's voice, right?
Yeah.
Or hey, flip the script. Are we gonna have like a female Indiana Jones? You could
What if? Oh, why not? Why not? Because you're right that you can kind of build an entire universe, Bobby, that around these stories. Like automatically, I was thinking about like, okay, well, we're thinking about Marion and and Indy. They had the son, Shia LaBeouf's character. I'm so sorry, I'm blinking out on character.
Mutt Williams.
Yep, Mutt.
Yeah, like what if he also had a little sister? Why not? And then it becomes like a whole family sort of saga.
Archaeology, traveling around.
Yeah, and animated, it's much more palatable for, I think, all audiences to kind of buy into that kind of logic, because you're like, well, they also, can fly, so I guess we kind of let that go. We let logic go for a second in animation, but I think that is a really interesting question that I hadn't really considered, and I think it's really hard to kind of like grasp the idea of another actor could play Indiana Jones, simply because of the logic of it being a person. This one particular archaeologist was Indiana Jones. Like if he were of the order of, I don't know, any sort of group of archaeologists, codename Indiana Jones, then
well, you're keying back to the 007 thing. Yeah, I see what you're saying. David made that same argument with me earlier. It was like, well, 007 is like a title, right? It's not a.
Thanks, David.
We were raised with that, so that's what we're used to. But see, I think people have such a connection to Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones that I think you're going to set yourself up for, like, if you do live action or movie, I think no matter what, you're going to have a generation of people who are like, no, it's not going to work for me. And
True.
I think that's part of the problem that happened with Solo. No matter who they had for that role, there was going to be people who were raised with Harrison Ford as Han Solo and weren't going to accept anything other than that.
But you, for the
Alden did a great job with that role.
accepted River Phoenix as young Indiana Jones, so why can't you accept a different young Indiana Jones? I will fight you.
I didn't. No. I didn't say it was a rational thing. I said it's a thing. And
Yeah.
I think, like you said earlier, that a lot of kids, the way they were exposed to Indy was through the Lego series. So that has separated Harrison Ford from the character for that generation. I had a lot of families who would, because our show had been there for 35 years, a lot of families would bring their kids to watch this show because they wanted their kids to have the same experience that they had. And the only way the kids knew it was from the Lego series. And so because of that, when you're talking about an animated series, I think it would be a much easier pill to swallow for sure, especially for the parents who've had kids now who've had that exposure and they've only seen Lego, maybe seen our show, and probably haven't seen the movies because I don't know a ton of 5-year-olds that are going to watch someone's heart get ripped out and be okay with it, or someone's face get melted.
I did.
So
Okay with it? I don't know.
we're not going to watch this part.
Right. We don't want them trying to replicate it with the dog, right? Yeah, let's not do that.
Om Nam Shiva. Yeah.
Om Namah Shivaya, yes.
It is an interesting question, though. He's just so iconic. I guess my choice has always been Jensen Ackles. I think he has kind of that bravado and could pull it off. I thought that he should have been in the selection for Solo as well, but
I was a big fan of Alden, Ehrenreich, who did Solo. I actually thought there are moments in Solo for me where he embodies, and clearly he did a lot of studying of Harrison's mannerisms. And even though he doesn't necessarily look like Harrison Ford, there were moments that I totally bought him as Han Solo with the swag, as a more optimistic Han Solo, younger, more enthusiastic, optimistic Han Solo. So yeah, I would see him given an Indiana Jones role a shot too. But I'm also maybe a little bit more optimistic and wily-eyed than some of our fans can be occasionally, you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was in no way saying that he did a bad job.
Oh, no.
Solo.
Yeah.
You know, I felt the same way. There were certain moments that I'm like, oh, yeah. Yes, he
nailed that.
Totally nailed that. You know, and Harrison Ford is such an amazing actor.
Yeah.
That's not easy to do. And you're stepping into some huge shoes.
Yeah, the biggest.
And you're stepping into a world that the fans, I mean, look, these people dress up as this character because they love him so much. And you know, it's kind of a no-win situation. And no matter how good you do, and even if Harrison Ford had come out and been like, nope, this is the guy I want to do this.
Yeah.
You know, I just don't think, unfortunately, you know, haters are gonna hate.
Well, I'll be on board if they try to do anything. I will be on board to watch it. I'll consume that content, right?
Well, yeah, and I said the same thing. You know, when people had issues with the prequels, you know, and now that dust is settled, and I think people see them for the quality that they are. I would always go in there and I'd say, look, I would take new Star Wars over no Star Wars
Any day.
And I think the same thing for Indy, you know?
Yeah.
You know, if there's thought put into it and they do it, I would rather have some new content to pull from and some new moments to have than have nothing.
Right, exactly.
Very much so.
And we always forget that these were family movies, as much as ripping hearts out from chests can be.
Yeah.
and that like the point is to share it with your family, and what better way to share your love of things, all Star Wars or Indiana Jones or all Lucasfilm franchise, than to like be able to have your child surprise you with something new as well.
Oh, yeah.
Or, you know, like that's just so cool that we get more. We get to create new memories out of people.
Yeah, I've got a 10-year-old and I love to watch him. I mean, I got 2 older kids, and of course we they were all very much into this stuff, the same as me, because we were at that age and going through it kind of together as father and kids. I'm an older dad now with a younger son, and now is more the, you know, the YouTube generation. So sitting down to watch a movie is such a challenge with him sometimes. Like, hey, you're gonna really love this. Just sit down and watch this for like an hour and a half, 2 hours. Trust me, you're gonna dig it, you know. And that becomes a challenge. But thankfully, he's done so with several of these. And I always laugh whenever he's very stand up. Oh, Dad, I'm not in the mood right now. I'm gonna do something else. So I put it on anyway, and then you catch him walking back and forth through the room and then stopping and watching the show. Like 15 minutes goes by, and then he's sitting on the table. He's watching the show, and you're like,
Yeah, I think that's when we were kids.
no.
I think
Not into what you're into, Dad.
Right. I just learned not to say anything. That way he'll just enjoy it, and Dad doesn't get involved, you know?
Oh, he's entered tween years so quickly.
Yeah, that's happening early. I'm like, you're not a tween yet, but you're certainly acting like a tween, right?
Yeah, I blame the YouTubes.
Yes.
Yeah, I hope that it becomes a treat for him to like dedicate an hour and a half and 2 hours to just watching good film
I
and
know.
fun film with his dad. I hope it becomes a treat again.
Yeah, I'm a movie nut, so I don't think it'll be avoidable forever. I think it's gonna, you know, he's watched like obviously all the Star Wars stuff, but watched it like going to the theater for anything that's come out. But even the original trilogy, getting him to actually sit down and actually enjoy the shows. My involvement with the Legion and such, unfortunately, I mean, I love it, but it puts him in a predicament where we're so overexposed. Like every weekend, whether it's a convention or it's, you know, all of our friends are hanging out and we're always building some crazy sand crawler or some nutty thing, right? So, you know, his buddies at school are like, oh my gosh, I saw the Batmobile this weekend. He's like, yeah, that's like every other day. He can care less. Because he's so saturated by it. So there's going to come a time, I think, maybe in middle school, where all of his buddies are like, oh man, your dad's the coolest. Right? He's a stormtrooper or Indiana Jones or whatever. And maybe we'll get a chance to circle back around and he'll be like, all right, so maybe dad's all right. Maybe.
Yeah, right now you kind of get the jock vibe. He walks by and he's like, nerd.
Yeah, and trust me, he's a nerd just about different things, right? If it's Minecraft or Fortnite, he's in.
Bobby, Adam, Aaron, do you guys have kids?
I have a 9-year-old, and she will not watch a movie to save her life. She just doesn't like them, and you know what? It's fine. She's super active. She does a lot of things, but she's also been immersed in Star Wars because obviously I have an office full of Star Wars stuff, and she's been immersed in Indiana Jones because it was, well, her whole life until COVID. And the funny thing is, everything she knows of these two things are from the 501st, from this room that I'm in that has just crazy stuff in it, and then from my job. And when she was learning to ride her bike, 6 years ago or whatever, she gets on her bike, and it was one of those times I'm like, okay, are you ready to go? You're ready to go without me? I'm going to run with you. I'm going to let you go. She turns and she looks at me and she just goes, I've got a bad feeling about this. And I was like, yes. That's my kid. So if I'm raising a little nerd, I'm totally okay with it.
Absolutely. Yeah. You should have said the force will be with you always. As you shut her off.
Oh, that's awesome.
Oh man. You know, I'm always and I'm sure most of us know, you know, obviously the backstory behind Indy and the story about the transition from Star Wars to Indiana Jones was that handoff of that baton was, you know, Lucas saying, I don't want to be anywhere near Hollywood whenever Star Wars comes out, because he thought, hey, this is going to be another failure. Everybody was concerned about it. So he and Spielberg run off to Hawaii, right, on a vacation. So he would be not around whenever that went down. And on that trip, Spielberg is talking to Lucas about his interest in maybe doing a 007, doing a James Bond movie. And then George was like, hey, you know what? I've got another idea that you might be interested in. They table the 007 thing and let's talk about this. And then he started talking about Indiana Jones. Of course, at the time, I think it was Indiana Smith. It wasn't Jones.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it turns into what we have to, which again is funny because we talked about Indy's son, whose name is Mutt. And then Indiana is named after the dog, and Chewbacca was named after George's dog. So there's an animal tie in here somewhere, right?
Yeah.
But I've always thought that story was intriguing. The fine threads that weave these universes kind of together between these amazing artists who created these things. You know.
Here, here. I think we're all in agreement on that.
Yeah. And then, weirdly enough, I mean, of course, in my later mid to late teen years, I guess, you had something like Top Gun come out, right? And I remember Top Gun fervently because again, listen to me rambling on about career choices. It was like an astronaut and then an archaeologist, and now it's going to be a fighter pilot, right? Because you see Top Gun, which increased like Navy recruitment went through the roof right after that movie, right? So I was curious. I'm like, wait a minute. So what was the impact of Indiana Jones to the archaeological, community? And as I kind of started reading through some different things about that, I found it curious. It had a big impact on people who thought about going into that field, which was awesome. But then the number of archaeologists who had spoken out, who loved the character, but are very keen to tell you that Indiana Jones is not an archaeologist. He's a looter. Have you guys heard that or read any of that?
Yeah.
Which I think kind of fits in with the time period that it's set in.
Yeah, exactly.
Those lines are blurred a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think like morally the character's supposed to be a little bit ambiguous.
I think if you're also pitting against like someone who accidentally gets the statue or, through a series of unfortunate events, doesn't get smushed by a giant rock. Like if you pit that person who is also a tomb looter against real life Nazis, then it's a little bit like, okay, well, we know who the real bad guy is here.
Okay, that's a good point, right? And at least I think most of the archaeologists recognize the entertainment value that Indiana Jones brought to us, obviously. But I did find it maybe that's weirdly educational for me. When I was they were like, hey, look, the bottom line is, Indy goes into this cave and he's getting the idol, the statue, right? But a real archaeologist would have given the statue to the Nazis and then spent 10 years evaluating the cave and how did they get the boulder up on the thing and where did all the booby traps come from and what were they made of? that would have been more the real archaeological thing. And I'm like, oh, I never really thought of it that way.
Right. Like he's going against the establishment anyway. Yeah. So the thing that always gets caught in my mind is it belongs in a museum.
Yes, it belongs in a museum.
Does it belong with the people who were living there in the indigenous country that you went and the statue for? Maybe I'm wrong.
maybe it predates the notion of cultural appropriation just a little bit, maybe. Yeah. I'm a big fan of the notion that we need to watch films through the lens in which they were created, not necessarily. I mean, we learn from our mistakes, and hopefully our society has grown and improved, and adapted. But you can watch that and still enjoy it, and maybe not be offended by some of the literally offensive things that happen.
Yeah, I think we live in time that we hindsight is 2020, and I think it brings more fun, in all honesty, to kind of poke at that and say that like that was a weird thing we did in movies back then. Yeah. Like, boy, do we know better now. But it is also worth a laugh of like, well, no, yeah, it taught me that Nazis are bad people, yeah. And it also like strangely, if you do pick it apart, it gives you kind of this really interesting interpretation, if you will, like at least I think movies do, of what our time period was like, what it was like in the 40s, and what it was like to be American, where you're just kind of bumbling around and making mistakes, but also like helping to save certain cultures that maybe were going to be decimated by an even greater evil. So I think it's like, it's really hopeful. And it's a really hopeful thought that I have, that like it's good to poke fun, and it's also that you're right, that like we have to look at it through the lens of what we knew then, and we only know what we know at the time.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
My wife and I were talking last night, actually, like pretty much just about this, and well, about like these issues. And I brought it back to, yeah, it's like in Raiders when Marion yells, "You can't do this to me. I'm an American," when she's in the basket. That line, it's funnier kind of now, like talking about those, like that entitlement and privilege, and it makes it worse, but it's also now to me funnier. I don't know.
I
Right.
think that also existed during that time period, though. So,
Oh yeah, yeah.
Right. And like, I was just, I only have this fresh in my memory because I was watching a little bit of The Last Crusades this afternoon. But like, what the British character goes like, "Doesn't anyone speak English around here?" And it's like, no, you're in Egypt. Why would that? What? But it is also that like that was and in many cultures and many different societies, English is still a dominant language. So it's not unfathomable words, guys. It's getting late for me.
Yeah.
But I love talking about this, so we keep talking. Yeah, that like it's funnier now because we recognize like the world is not as small as it once was and once perceived that it was in the 1940s, and that there are like these huge cultural differences and language differences that back in World War II, maybe the average person wouldn't have thought that.
Right. You know, I just think that, I know we're coming to the end of our time, so, but I really, really enjoyed all of this. I just kind of feel like, whenever we were younger, um, these movies and others that are kind of similar to them, they created these interesting worlds that we really wanted to kind of visit and interact with and become a part of, which has led to the costuming and all these kind of things. They were just awe-inspiring and sparked our young imaginations, and made us wanted to go out and adventure seek and those kind of things. And as we get older, I think it kind of speaks volumes that these films that were created by Lucasfilm, which is obviously what we're all here to celebrate, right? Is the amazing endurance that they've had in the films that they've created and the worlds that they've created for us to kind of live in and embody. You think about Star Wars and Indiana Jones and even Willow and Labyrinth and all these amazing things, right? And that list continues to go on. And I certainly just hope that they continue that creative nature for generations to come, whether it's through animated Indiana Jones or Star Wars or Willow. All these new things come out. I'm just excited for everything that they have to bring, and I can't wait for hopefully like another 50 years, right? Yeah, thank you guys all so much for hanging out a little bit and talking, nerding out about some Indiana Jones stuff and other stuff too. Okay.
Multifaceted nerds over here, okay? Make hats.
Yeah, thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.
All right, we'll see you around.